Hello, everybody. This is Jimmy, and you are reading with Jimmy. Today, we're reading an epic poem called Beowulf, early English. This is written a long time ago. It's translated by Burton Raphael, and this is the part one of 8 parts. Ready? This is going to be exciting. Beowulf, prologue. Hear me. We've heard of Danish heroes, ancient kings, and the glory they cut for themselves, swinging mighty swords, and how Shield made slaves of soldiers from every land, crowds of captives that he'd beaten into terror. He traveled to Denmark alone, an abandoned child, but he changed his own fate, and he lived to be rich and much honored. And he ruled the lands on all sides. Wherever the sea would take them, his soldiers sailed, returned with tribute and obedience. There was a brave king, and he gave them more than his glory. Conceived a son for the Danes, a new leader, allowed them by the grace of God. They had lived before his coming kingless and miserable, and now the Lord of all life, ruler of glory, blessed them with a prince, Beowulf. Beowulf is a Danish king, son of Shield, whose power and fame soon spread through the world. Shield's strong son was the glory of Denmark, for his father's warriors were wound round his heart with golden rings, bound in their prince by his father's treasure. And so young men build the future, wisely open-handed in peace, protected in war, so that warriors earn their fame and wealth is shaped with a sword. I'm going to stop there for just a second. And even though we're going to analyze Beowulf when we're done, I like to pause and just look at the first part, as you know. And it's important that this is an epic poem, so they count the lines here. And this is a story about, as you can guess, Vikings. These are the Norsemen, right? So remember, this is way before television, radio. This is when they sat around the fire and told stories. So this is the genealogy, the hereditary of what we're going to talk about, which is Beowulf, who's the title of this poem. Beo is the son of Shield. So Shield is the first king of the Danes in Beowulf. So he comes to Denmark alone, starts his kingdom, has a son, Beowulf. But it's important to note how they talk here, and they are basically, swords are very important. You're going to find out that they name their swords sometimes in this epic poem. And they're very fierce warriors. These are warriors. Captives, they beat into terror. They conquer lands, they conquer people, they bring tribute. So this is a warrior class. All right? Let's continue. When his time was come, the old king died, and still strong but called to the Lord's hands. His comrades carried him down to the shore, bore him as their leader had asked, their lord and companion. While words could move on his tongue, Shield's reign had been long. So while words could move on his tongue, while he could talk, his reign had been long, and he had ruled them well. There in the harbor was a ring-prowed fighting ship, its timbers icy, waiting. And there they brought the beloved body of their ring-giving lord, that Shield, and they laid him near the mast. They're describing the burial of their king. Next to that noble corpse, you see how they use adjectives? Noble corpse. They heaped up treasures. By the way, this is third-person narration, right? We don't know who's saying this. It's just a story. It's third-person narrator. They heaped up treasures, jeweled helmets, hooked swords, and coats of mail. That's armor. Armor carried from the ends of the earth. So when they would go and they would raid villages, they would bring back the goodies, right? Which would be armor, jewels, gold. No ship had ever sailed so brightly fitted. No king set forth more deeply mourned. Forced to set him adrift, floating as far as the tide might run, they refused to give him less than their hoards of gold, than those who shipped him away, an orphan and a beggar, to cross the waves alone. So they didn't want to bury him without goodies. As you know, ancient Egyptians would bury the pharaohs with goodies, right? So the Vikings were no different. They would bury their ruler with goodies. High over the head, they flew his shining banner, and then sadly let the water pull at the ship and watched it slowly sliding to where neither rulers nor heroes nor anyone can say whose hands opened to take that motionless cargo. That's just beautifully written and translated. Remember, we wouldn't be able to read the whole English. In the analysis, we're going to talk about that. So translations are very important, but this guy who translated this I think is just excellent, which is why Jimmy chose it. But in this case, think about that. So they put their Lord in the ship, they send the ship off to the sea, and they're slowly, it's going into the distance as they watch it, where heroes nor anyone can say whose hands opened to take the motionless cargo. Just beautiful. And then Beowulf, that's his son, was king in the Danish castle, Scyld's son, ruling as long as his father, and as loved, a famous lord of men. This is not Beowulf, this is Beowulf. This is the Scyld's son. We don't know Beowulf yet. We haven't met him. It's like Jimmy. Jimmy's a common name, right? Jimmy. So there's Beowulf, not Beowulf. And as loved is famous by, and he in turn gave his people a son, Halfdan, right? Halfdan, however you'd like to say that. That's Beowulf's son. This is, again, genealogy. You're tracing the ancestry of to where we're going to get. This is a long wind-up, but this is the poem, reciting the poem. And remember, this is not necessarily written down, right? But it's being recited. Somebody's talking. Third-person narrator. He was a fierce fighter who led the Danes to the end of his long life, and he left them 4 children. 3 princes to guide them in battle, Hrothgar, Hrothgar, and Helga the Good, and 1 daughter, Years, who was given to Onlilia, king of the Swedes, and became his wife and their queen. Why do they do this? Why does the epic poetry, the third-person narrator, read all this? Because he's reminding people where people came from. Remember, there's no Ancestry.com. There's none of that stuff exists when this poem was created. In fact, I'm going to show you in the analysis, you can't even read the English that this was written in because it's like German and English and a combination of languages. You have to be a linguist to read this in the original. Thank goodness for translators who take the time to do it. So he's given the genealogy to give a sense of what he's leading to, which is the story of Beowulf. So then Hrothgar is this one of the sons of Halfdan, right? Great Halfdan, a fierce fighter. Beowulf's son, right? Taking the throne, led the Danes to such glory that comrades and kinsmen swore by his sword, and young men swelled his armies, and he thought of greatness and resolved to build a hall that would hold his mighty band and reach higher toward heaven than anything that had ever been known to the sons of men. So Hrothgar is a powerful leader, gathering a lot of people, and he's going to build this hall. And in that hall, he'd divide the spoils of their victories to old, to young, and what they'd earned in battle, but leaving the common pastures untouched and taking no lives. So he would gather the riches, right? Then he would share them in the hall he built, but leaving the common pastures untouched. The work was ordered, the timbers tied, and shaped by the hosts the lots of people that Hrothgar ruled. It was quickly ready, the most beautiful of dwellings, built as he wanted, and then he, whose word was obeyed all over the earth, named it Herat. That's the name of the mead hall. You're going to see what a mead hall is. It's like his castle, right? Notice, by he whose word was obeyed all over the earth, as he wanted, named it Herat. Who's this? That's Hrothgar. His boast come true, he commanded a banquet, and he opened out his treasureful hands. You'll see that the leader, the Viking leader, the king, shares the wealth from when he goes and conquers people. When he brings wealth back, he shares it. He opened out his treasureful hands, that towering place, gabbled and huge, stood waiting for time to pass, for war to begin, for flames to leap as high. Because remember, this is the northern Norway, Denmark, Sweden. Gets cold up there, so these mead halls they built would have huge raging fires inside with an open roof. As the feud that would light them, and for Herat to burn. But a powerful monster, living down in the darkness, growled in pain, impatient as day after day the music rang. So Hrothgar is building this beautiful mead hall, and then there's a monster living down in the darkness, right? And he hears music loud in the hall, the harps rejoicing, call, and the poets' clear songs, sung of the ancient beginnings of all of us. So they're feasting and they're singing, songs, recalling the Almighty making the earth. The Almighty is a reference to God. So this is like a religious thing too. The Almighty shaping these beautiful plains marked off by oceans, and then proudly setting the sun and the moon to glow across the land and light it. If you remember your Bible, it's very important because these are allusions, Allusion. Let's write that down. Allusions. To glow across the land, the corners of the earth were made lovely with trees and leaves, made quick with life, and each of the nations who now move on its face. And then, as now warriors sang of their pleasure, so Hrothgar's men lived happy in this hall, till the monster stirred, that demon, that fiend, Grendel. There's the name of the monster, Grendel, who haunted the moors, the wild marshes, and made his home in a hell, not hell, but earth. He was spawned in that slime, conceived by a pair of those monsters born of Cain. Cain is an allusion, right? Cain and Abel. Murderous creatures, banished by God, punished forever for the crime of Abel's death. So if you know the story of Cain and Abel, right? They were Adam and Eve's sons, and Cain killed Abel. We can review that in the analysis when we talk about that. So he's talking, the narrator is saying Grendel was born of Cain. So he's a descendant of Cain. We'll talk why that's important in the analysis. Murderous creatures banished by God, punished forever for the crime of Abel's death. When we read the Bible, if you read in the analysis, you'll find the mark of Cain. So the Almighty drove those demons out, and their exile was bitter. They were shut away from men. They split into 1,000 forms of evil, spirits, fiends, goblins, monsters, giants, a brood forever opposing the Lord's will, and again defeated. That's foreshadowing. Foreshadowing. So even though they oppose, right, the Lord's will, they are again and again defeated. That's foreshadowing of what's going to happen to Grendel. Got it? Any questions? Email me, jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com. Chapter 2. And then, when darkness had dropped, Grendel went up to Herat. So Grendel, the monster, goes to the Herat, which is the meat hall, wondering what the warriors would do in that hall when their drinking was done. He found them sprawled in sleep, suspecting nothing, their dreams undisturbed. The monster's thoughts were as quick as his greed or his claws, and he slipped through the door, and there in silence he snatched up 30 men, smashed them, unknowing in their beds, and he ran out with their bodies, the blood dripping behind him, back to his lair, delighted with his night's slaughter. What a monster! So he kills 30 people. Holy! At daybreak, with the sun's first light, they saw how well that he had worked. He, meaning there's a pronoun. He had worked. Who's he? Grendel. And in that gray morning broke their long feast with tears and laments for the dead. So they wake up. Probably they were drinking a lot in the meat hall. That's what they did at night. And they just see the work of this monster. Hrothgar, their lord, sat joyless in Herat, a mighty prince mourning their fate of his lost friends and companions, and knowing by its tracks that some demon had torn his followers apart. He wept, fearing the beginning might not be the end. And that night, Grendel came again. So set on murder that no crime could ever be enough, no savage assault quench his lust for evil. And then each warrior tried to escape him, searched for the rest in different beds, as far as Herat as they could find, seeing how Grendel hunted when they slept. Distance was safety, and the only survivors were those who fled. So they're running around trying to fight this the monster. The only safety survivors were those who fled. Hate had triumphed. And so Grendel ruled, fought with the righteous, won against many, and won. So Herat, the meat hall, stood empty and stayed deserted for years, 12 winters of grief for Hrothgar. 12 years. King of the Danes, sorrow heaped at his door by hell-forged hands. It's a beautiful, hell-forged hands. They use a lot of these hyphen words to describe for adjectives, to describe things. So keep your eyes open for the hyphen. Hrothgar, his misery, leaped the seas and was told and sung in all men's ears. So the story of Grendel killing all these Danes spread across the land, and how Grendel's hatred began, and how the monster relished his savage war on the Danes, keeping the bloody feud alive, seeking no peace, no offering, no truce, and accepting no settlement, no price in gold or land, and paying the living for one crime only with another. He doesn't. So you can't bribe him, Grendel. No one waited for reparation from his plundering claws. That shadow of death hunted in the darkness, and he stalked Hrothgar's warriors, old, young. It didn't matter to Grendel, lying and waiting, hidden in the mist, invisibly following them from the edge of the marsh, always there, unseen. And so mankind's enemy continued his crimes, killing as often as he could, coming alone, bloodthirsty and horrible. And though he lived in Herat when the night hid him, he never dared touch the king Hrothgar's glorious throne, protected by God, whose love Grendel could not know. But Hrothgar's heart was bent. The best and the most noble of his council debated remedies. They sat in secret sessions talking of terror and wondering what the bravest of warriors could do. And sometimes they sacrificed to the old stone gods. So they're ignoring God and sacrificing to the old stone gods because they're trying to figure out what to do. Made heathen vows, so they're even abandoning God, the Christian God, made heathen vows, hoping for hell's support, the devil's guidance in driving their affliction off. See, they're willing to do anything to stop this Grendel character, right? That was their way. And the heathens' only hope, hell always in their hearts, knowing neither God nor his passing as he walks through our world, the Lord of heaven and earth. Their ears could not hear his praise nor know his glory. Let them beware. Those who are thrust into danger, clutched at by trouble, yet can carry no solace in their hearts and cannot hope to be better. Hail to those who will rise to God, drop off their dead bodies and seek our Father's peace. So this is almost like a prayer. Don't go back to your heathen ways. Trust in the Lord. Right? So the living sorrow of Healfdane's son, that's Hrothgar, simmered bitter and fresh, and no wisdom or strength could break it. The agony hung on the king and the people alike, harsh, unending, violent, cruel, evil. So these people are in bad shape. Now notice, here comes Beowulf. In his far-off home, Beowulf, Hildgak's follower and the strongest of the Geats, greater and stronger than anyone anywhere in the world. Beowulf heard how Grendel filled knights with horror, and he quickly commanded a boat fitted out, proclaiming that he would go to that famous king, and he would sail across the sea to Hrothgar. So we're going to stop there for a second. So the Geats were a tribe, a northern Germanic tribe that lived in Gotland or whatever in southern Sweden from ancient times until you can read about this. The Geats were sometimes called Goths. So remember, this is all in the northern climates. It's cold. So Beowulf, who's a Geat, G-E-A-T, Goth, hears about Hrothgar's plight, fills his boat, right? And now when help was needed, Hrothgar had none of the wise ones regretted his going, much as he was loved by the Geats. So they said, okay, this is good, you're going. The omens were good. Omens were things that they used to believe in signs. The signs were good, right? And they urged the adventure on. And so Beowulf chose the mightiest men he could find, the bravest and the best of the Geats, 14 in all. And he led them down to their boat, and he knew that the sea would point the prow straight to that distant Danish shore. And then they sailed, set their ship out on the waves under the cliffs, and they were ready for what came that would wound them through the currents. So there they go. And remember, this is not modern boating, right? The wind, they got maybe some sails, a rudder. The seas beating at the sand, and were borne in the lap of their shining ship, lined with gleaming armor. So this is a warship going safely in that oak-hard boat to where their hearts took them. The wind hurried them over the waves, and the ship foamed through the sea like a bird, until in the time that they had known it would take. And standing in the round curled prow, can you imagine the Viking boats in your mind? The round curled prow, they could see the sparkling hills, high and green, jutting over the shore and rejoicing in those rock-steeped cliffs, right? The Danes' land. They quietly ended their voyage. So they come to rest on Danish soil. Jumping to the ground, the Geats pushed their boat to the sand and they tied it in place, their mail shirts and armor rattling as they moored the ship. So they're in armor now. They're ready for battle. And then they gave thanks to God for the easy crossing. High on the wall, a Danish watcher patrolling along the cliffs saw the travelers crossing to the shore, their shields raised and shining, and he came riding down. And this was Hrothgar's lieutenant, spurring his horse, needing to know why they had landed. They don't allow just anybody coming in. These men in armor, shaking his heavy spear in their face. This guy's not a coward, right? He says, "Whose soldiers are you? You who have carried in your deep nailed ship across the sea road to this country of mine. Listen, I stood on these cliffs longer than you know, keeping our coast free of pirates, raiders sneaking ashore from their ships, seeking our lives and our gold. Now, none have ever come more openly than you. And yet, you've offered no password, no sign from my prince. I don't have any permission from my people for your landing here. And nor have I ever seen out of all the men on earth one greater than has come with you. No commoner carries such weapons." In other words, he's pretty impressed by what he's looking at with these warriors. "Unless his appearance and his beauty are both lies. You, tell me your name and your father's name. I don't want any spies to go further into Danish soil than you've already come. Strangers, from wherever it is you sailed, you tell it, and you tell it quickly. And the quicker, the better. I say for all of us, speak. Say exactly who you are and from where and why." We're going to stop there. You've been reading with Jimmy. This is part 1. Beowulf has landed. He's come to help the king, Hrothgar, right? With this Grendel creature. Learn more about Beowulf by watching and reading along with Jimmy on our ongoing videos on this website. We want you to read part 2 next. And be sure to visit and read other classics on this website with Jimmy. Remember, if you have any questions or comments, please email me. Jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com. Jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com. Thanks for this. Look forward to seeing you for part 2. This is Beowulf. What a poem. You're going to be excited. Thank you.